Derbyshire Keep Our NHS Public. And I think we're doing something a bit big today because we're looking at transformational politics and transformational ideas, because this meeting is a combination of people from the Derbyshire Climate Coalition and people from Derbyshire Keep Our NHS Public and those kind of areas of health campaigning. And clearly those two areas often don't talk to each other enough, which is a problem, as other areas are important too. There's an emerging project called Bring Back Better, which is what Harry will talk about a little bit later. So I think we're doing something really quite important, really. And we're looking at, in this discussion, what we have in common, what we understand that we have in common, and what kind of futures we want and how we'll fight for that. So that's quite a big task, really, an important one. Apart from Climate Change Coalition and Derbyshire Keep Our NHS Public, Unite Community are heavily involved in supporting this. Okay, now the idea is to be about an hour, just perhaps a little more than an hour. And after having the three speakers, who will each speak for about 5 minutes, some very short questions, and then some responses from them, and then open up to a much broader discussion after that. Just to say now, in terms of questions, I think a question is something which is perhaps 7 or 8 words with a question mark at the end. So the brief questions to the three speakers are going to be hopefully short, and that means there'll be time to have a broader discussion a little bit later. I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourselves because there's 34 people here and the time won't allow that really, but please do say your name when you ask a question. Okay, I'm delighted to welcome Harry Holmes from Bring Back Better, Denise Ludlam from Derbyshire County Council, but first of all to speak for 5 minutes, and I'll say a bit more about him, my mate, Colin. Wave, Colin. Well, that's Colin, okay. I mean, Colin is chair of Doctors for the NHS, an association of doctors that believes that the profit motive should have no place in the NHS. Public service is a much stronger foundation than that. He's had various jobs before he retired as a consultant, and since then has continued campaigning actively for the restoration of an NHS that is universal, comprehensive, funded from general and progressive taxation, publicly owned and delivered and accountable. It's drawn him into the murky world of politics, becoming the first Labour councillor to represent his part of Halifax, and into the High Court alongside Stephen Hawking, defending as a claimant in a judicial review, which they won partly. When we spoke about this, Colin said that his first passion is health, his second passion is climate change issues. So I think we've got a good speaker here. Colin, over to you. Unlock.
Thank you very much, Keith. Yes, I mean, climate change and health have very closely linked, because one of the major public health risks for the existence of the human race is climate change. Currently, coronavirus looks like an earthquake which is rippling around the world, but the chaos that climate change is likely to bring is going to be far, far worse. Coronavirus is only likely to be a major problem for a few years, but the carbon dioxide that we're pumping into the atmosphere now will hang around for centuries, and the changes that we would need to make to adapt to that may well be beyond our capability as a society. The competition to extract as much money out of people, the natural world and the earth below our feet, has brought us to this point, and it's madness to think that more commercial competition can solve the problems that we've created for ourselves. Only decisive actions by governments working constructively together can get us out of this mess. After the financial crisis of 2008-9, the financial sector was reinflated by quantitative easing, what Yanis Varoufakis describes as social care for the bankers. What we need this time round is investing in the people of the world, who are really the main resource that we have to solve our problems. And that's got to be done in a way that will produce a long-term sustainability of the way that we live. We've been told that people won't stand for big government interference. Well, we've seen quite clearly that government is able to close down a lot of the functions of the country, and people will tolerate it. They will if they understand why it's being done and see the changes being delivered competently. And that competence is something that unfortunately is sorely lacking at the moment. They say that governments lack the power, but we've seen what they've done around the world with the consent of people, by and large. They say that governments don't have the money, but they've found the magic money tree. They just have to decide what to use that for, and investing in the people of the country and the rest of the world, or whether to fritter it away through feeding the finance machine. I've been asked to give a short wish list for what I would like to see within the NHS. And the first one is not strictly within the NHS. It's to reform our social care system, and in a way that is much more consistent with the founding principles of the NHS, that it should be universal, free at the point of use, staffed by people with professional training, with a career structure, and a salary that will allow them to maintain some dignity and feel that they're being rewarded and not having to be subsidized through the benefit system. We need to see, before this crisis came upon us, waiting lists for treatment in the NHS were at their highest level ever. There were 4.6 million people sitting on waiting lists before coronavirus struck. We need a workforce that is adequate to actually deal with that problem. For too many years, staff have been seen as the problem, as health organisations have tried to slim down their costs. So they've been seen as the problem rather than as the solution. And as a result, they felt unvalued, and they've been asked to constantly, well, when you're trained, you know what good practice looks like. But if barriers are being put in your way constantly from every day to working to deliver good practice, then it quickly becomes demoralizing. If we've seen that with the increased prominence of the health service, that applicants to nursing courses have risen sharply during this time because people have seen how much it's valued and have been inspired by that. And
Colin, 30 seconds.
Okay. Other wishes: end the hostile environment. It's got no place in the NHS, which is supposed to be universal. Scrap commercialization and bring back professionalism. We need to harness the power of the team. You know, being able to say, I work for the NHS as a porter, as a cleaner, as a caterer, means much more than saying I work for Calderdale and Huddersfield Solutions Limited. So outsourcing needs to end, including medical laboratories, radiology, and the other support services. Capital investment into the equipment that's needed to be able to do the job that you know you should be doing. And decentralization. The NHS in England has become very much a top-down driven organisation. We've seen during this crisis that people have been asked to do the best they can, and they've been given the freedom to do it, and they have delivered. That is the kind of NHS that will attract people to work in it. That is the kind of NHS that will actually deliver for the people in this country.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Denise, please unlock. Denise works for Derbyshire County Council. She has responsibility for issues around climate change, and I'm looking forward to her 5 minutes. Denise, over to you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. Yeah, that was a really good introduction from Colin. So thank you for that. So what I'd just like to do is to outline what Derbyshire County Council has been doing so far, and a little bit about short, medium and long-term plans moving forwards. So Derbyshire County Council produced a climate change manifesto in just over a year ago that had 14 different pledges that covered all sorts of issues relating to the environment, not just to climate change. And I think that's absolutely right, because I don't think you can consider climate change in isolation. We then took 2 reports to Cabinet in November last year. One is the Environment and Climate Change Framework, which sets out how we're going to work with local authorities across Derbyshire, and that would be 11 in total, to take a common approach to tackling climate change. And I can talk a little bit more in more detail about that if you'd like. The second paper that was taken was a carbon or greenhouse gas reduction plan, looking at how the council's emission, how we're going to get the council's emissions down to net zero. And we've produced a plan which shows that we could do that, reduce them to net zero by 2032 under current conditions. So then, taking those forwards, we held a large event in March, early March this year, called Tackling Climate Change Together, where we had around 220 people from, I think, 89 different organisations and businesses. And that was an event really targeted at businesses from across Derbyshire, looking at how those organisations can actually support Derbyshire to reduce its emissions across the county, across the area. And at this point, what I should say is that Derbyshire County Council's emissions from our estate and operations account for around 1% of the emissions in the county. We can influence, along with the other boroughs and districts, we can influence about another 35 or 40% of emissions, which leaves roughly 60% of emissions that the councils, the local authorities, have very little influence over, which means that communities, and by communities I mean businesses, I mean Mrs. Smith who lives down the road, I mean schools, education establishments, everybody has to play their part to reduce those emissions, which means everybody's got to have a really good understanding of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. And achieving that, to gain that public support, widespread public support, which Colin mentioned earlier, is really important. It can't just be support of a small sector of our community. Moving forward, we are holding a low carbon housing event in the autumn. This has obviously had to be quite drastically changed recently, so it's now going to be a virtual event which will be held as a series of short online presentations over, I think, 3 days. We are currently kind of going through how that's going to work. But that will be looking at retrofit, because of course decarbonising heat is really crucial, but obviously energy efficiency is your first port of call. So one of the things that I was asked if I could mention was about how we are making the recovery from COVID green, and I have to hold my hands up and say I've not been involved in the recovery process at all. I am sort of thinking of the bigger climate change, longer term climate change issues. So what I can tell you is that the leader of the council, Barry Lewis, is very, very keen that any economic response to COVID is a green response and has that kind of long-term vision, which I think is really positive. So the time at the moment has been spent on we're trying to understand the impact of COVID on our emissions across the county and but internally as well. So we have got some preliminary data about how that's impacted transport emissions across the county and so on. We're gathering information and evidence and about what that future might look like. And we know that there's huge public support for a green recovery. And I think, again, that's really positive, but we need to explain exactly what that will entail. We've taken some short-term measures immediately, and that's about active travel. So you've probably heard the news that the government has given local authorities significant amounts of money to do some active travel measures, taking advantage of this modal shift that there's been in walking and cycling, and we have data for that as well. So Derbyshire County Council has been given £443,000, which they have spent. I just need to look at the figures here. This is mainly on town centres. That has to be spent by the end of July, and we have spent that in 26 market towns, plus a couple of other places don't qualify as market towns, on pop-up cycle lanes, which are temporary, cycle parking, which is permanent. All the pedestrian crossings have been recalibrated so that it's quicker times for pedestrian crossing. There's more time, it comes back to pedestrian time to cross.
And 1 minute, please. 1 minute.
Thank you. And some socially distancing at bus stops and things like that. So in that, a further £1.7 million is available for Derbyshire, if we can justify what we want to do with that, and that has to be spent by the end of the financial year. So we've drawn up a list of 269 interventions that we're rag-rating and trying to push those forward. Then there is a longer term initiative, and we need to be looking to central government for things like, is the economic recovery going to include things like retrofit, supporting retrofit, I suppose, initiatives really. So we are moving forwards, and it's a very exciting time, but we do need to think short, medium and long term and get that right. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. That was very concrete and actually very encouraging. When the council people might not be that confident about seem to be going in at least partly in the right direction. That is delightful. So thank you very much, Denise. Harry, please unlock. I became aware about 3 months ago of a project called Bring Back Better. And I know that in the national events taking place over the weekend of the 4th and 5th of July, to celebrate and fight for our NHS, Bring Back Better are part of that. So I'm delighted to speak to some. I think, Harry, you're probably local, aren't you?
Hi, so I'm from Huddersfield Way.
That's local. Just for me.
Hi.
Harry, 5 minutes, go.
Okie dokie. Yeah, so I'm Harry. I'm part of what's called the Hub support team of local organisers for Green New Deal UK. And that's now sort of a key organiser within this campaign to build back better. I'm sort of delighted that this event today is in tandem with sort of healthcare workers and the like, because I think at the moment there's still a lot of people that have a sort of view of low carbon jobs and the climate transition that's still stuck sort of on a vision of solar panels and wind farms. But really, when you think about it in the long term, health workers, teaching are actually the low carbon jobs we need. Rather than an economy that's built on the proliferation of stuff usually extracted from the global south, what we really need to be talking about is restructuring the economy to meet the needs of people, i.e. health, education, and in doing so we'll have a low carbon economy rather than one just focused on infinite growth on a finite world. And the idea is with this Build Back Better campaign that this COVID period, the COVID recovery and how we come back from this will be key. And we need to build back better. We need a new normal. It's a moment where the trajectory's changed. And I think it's really important that we as people who are probably seasoned campaigners in the area of environment, in the area of health, intervene at this time to say, well, no, the normal wasn't okay. It was deeply problematic. We were heading towards climate catastrophe. Our NHS was underfunded, and we can do better going forward now that we have the real impetus to think about it. So, I mean, what does this idea of building back better look like? We have sort of 5 guiding principles. The first is that the economy should be seeking to secure the needs of everyone in the UK now and into the future. So that's focused on, our economy should be focused on, irrespective of employment or nationality, ensuring people have food, healthcare, a secure income, good housing, clean air, and the like. The second principle, which is probably relevant to a lot of people today, is to protect and invest in our public services. We've seen years of austerity now, and we really need to be reinvesting in these services to effectively provide the NHS and its amazing task in our society. As we've seen in this COVID crisis, that years of austerity have good and really damaged the response to this pandemic and ultimately made it liable for many of the deaths. So the decisions there have had a really severe impact, and we need to sort of be reinvesting and protecting those services going forward out of this crisis. The third principle is probably the most relevant to the environmentalists, which is to rebuild society with a transformative Green New Deal. And that's not a sort of Green New Deal that's just like the government's going to invest X billion in, you know, the solar panel industry. It should be a comprehensive plan that focuses on decarbonising the economy in a way that tackles inequality and enhances the lives of ordinary people. In doing so, it should be creating thousands of well-paid, secure, unionised jobs, which is obviously relevant considering the recession we're likely going into. I know as a graduate, that's something I'm worried about. The fourth principle is that it should be investing in people, not big businesses. The quantitative easing that happened in 2008 has been already mentioned, where it was socialism for the rich, right? A key concern at the moment is that bailout plans aren't just given to airlines with no conditions, but they're actually invested in communities that need the income, supporting people and not businesses. And finally, principle 5 of the Build Back Better campaign is we should be building solidarity and community across borders. We've seen an amazing movement reinforcing communities and building mutual aid here in the UK internally, but I think we really need to be looking outwards and understanding that our economy is built off extraction from the global south, and we have reparations and inequalities that need to be undone there. So what does this look like in political practice, right? What does the Build Back Better look like? The key thing at the moment is organising people-powered campaigns within communities. So community groups articulating what, given all those things, it would look like if you build back better in your area. And given that massive community mobilisation, then really putting pressure on MPs and winning community support to listen to our demands and ensure in the coming months that, you know, this recovery plan and the recovery strategy actually does tackle the climate crisis, tackle the crisis of inequality, and tackle the healthcare crisis. And ultimately, as we come out of the lockdown and everything like that, talking about mass mobilisations and campaigns that can be done there, but also digital ones as well in that regard.
Harry, 1 minute.
Okay, so a bit more detail on that. Treasury is currently working on what it calls Project Birch, which is its design of the recovery plan. And so we really need to be sort of active at this moment. And then key in the coming weeks then is to put pressure on these MPs. So we have sort of a mass MP letter tool, so a tool that you can use to write to your MP. That's probably the first thing that people can do. And on the 30th of June is the Climate Coalition's mass lobby with MPs, where you're allowed to have conversations and engagement with MPs. And would encourage people to build back better and the need for COVID and climate recovery there. Beyond this, we're trying to put together a
Harry may have frozen. I'm sure he'll come back in a moment.
Yeah, I think he left the room previously, so I don't know whether the connection might have dropped and he might have been kicked out. Maybe I don't know. So
all I've got, Greg, is just a kind of frozen face.
Yeah, no. So I'm not sure. He might come back in a bit, but yeah.
So we'll give him a chance to, if he reappears. Hopefully he will. I'm sure those of us have experienced. Are you back, Harry? Okay, so folks, we'll move on.
Sorry, did I just drop out?
You did. We're glad you're back.
Apologies. Where did I drop out at? What was I saying?
You were saying you had 30 seconds left.
Okay. Yeah, so quite quickly, there's a regular training call. There's one that's going to be on the 25th of June talking about this. And we have a Facebook group for local campaigners who care about this project to join and sort of get regular updates. And then the 5th of July is the NHS birthday. So we're planning to sort of do mass mobilisations and actions around that. It's the 72nd birthday of the NHS. So just overall, that COVID is a crisis not just of health, but of our creaking and unfair normal that already existed. And what we're trying to do is to create a movement of community groups that traditionally didn't work together, like healthcare and climate, to push for, in the coming months, a proper COVID recovery plan that deals with the environmental and other crises our society faces. Yeah, hopefully that's okay.
Thank you very much, Harry. There's my applauding sound thing. Thank you very much, Harry. It seems to me already, I've got only one person saying hat in the chat box to ask a short question. It seems to me there's so much information pouring out of these three speakers, events and ideas. You need to find some way of capturing that and joining it together. I mean, Harry's last comment was getting together health campaigners and environmental campaigners. Well, this is a tiny beginning into that, in that context. So I've got Laura. Would you unlock Laura from Matlock to ask a very, very short question? There'll be more chance later, but just make it a short question, please. Laura, unlock.
I just wanted to ask Denise about the low carbon housing event in the autumn. It's over 3 days. Would it, if those of us who are working are often excluded from the county council events, would it be recorded? Could we ensure that it's recorded?
Okay, thank you.
And
that's the first question. Denise,
okay.
trying to answer that? Denise, unlock.
I'm sure it could be recorded.
Thank you.
I'm sure someone will know how to do it. The event is one of a series being held around the country, so they're regional events, and the idea is to think about how we can promote retrofit locally. So it's thinking about developing supply chains, skills and so on locally, so it will involve local people rather than nationally, but the same event is happening around the country. And at the minute we're not sure what platform that's going to be on, but I'm sure, I really like the idea of recording it. I'm sure that's possible, as long as I don't have to organise it.
Thank you. Jill Scott, would you want to ask your question or should I ask it for you? Unlock, Jill.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'll ask it if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it's a question for Laura. I was actually at the DCC, the council meeting, the day that they produced the climate manifesto.
It's a question for Denise, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a question for Denise. What we had been asking for, and I'm sure people are aware of this, was for Derbyshire County Council to declare a climate emergency. They refused to do that, and if you undermined our demand, our being the people's demand, by declaring a climate emergency, and it was a disgraceful meeting because Barry Lewis, councillor.
We can do this later, Jill. This is the question. We asked the question. So your question was.
Yeah,
when will they
declare a climate emergency? When will they acknowledge that there is a climate emergency?
Okay. Thank you, Julie. You can say more things later. There'll be more chances later on. Denise, unlock.
So the question is, when will we declare a climate emergency?
Yes.
I don't think we will declare a climate emergency. I think what we need to do is to look at the action. So I think if you read the framework, one of the things it says is that we are aiming to decarbonise in line with the carbon budgets in the Paris Agreement. So I'm assuming you're kind of familiar with that trajectory. So it's certainly not about the date that we become carbon neutral. It's about the trajectory we take. And I think that's really important, and we need to focus on that.
Thank you, Denise. I've got a very short question indeed here from Dick, and then it'll be followed by one from Terry Joyner. Dick, very short question. Unlock. Unlock. Yeah. Dick, unlock. It's not working, Dick. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay, right, got it.
Very short question, Dick.
Okay, it's a question for Harry in relation to a parallel campaign that's going on concerning Save Rolls-Royce, because there's a huge number of job losses, and I know that Rolls-Royce have problems in terms of climate emergency, but I noticed Harry's point about thousands of trade unionist jobs, and just to be aware that there is that parallel struggle going on. And any comments?
Dick?
Thank you.
The question is?
Awareness of the Rolls-Royce campaign, and what are your comments on it?
Okay, thanks. Unlock, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a difference than a lot of sort of environmental campaigns that we are actually talking about creating good unionised jobs, right? Yeah, we're aware sort of that there's a lot of companies like the airlines as well is another campaign that we've been following closely with the mass layoffs at BA and the like. I mean, our position is that, you know, we're talking about the creation of these good unionised jobs, and the government's talking about jumping in to possibly give bailout funds. They should be doing it and thinking about the climate emergency, possibly using retraining to be producing climate technologies and the like. You know, there's the capacity there, there's the skill base there, and it seems to be short-sighted to not be thinking about how we can repurpose sort of the skill set at something like Rolls-Royce to be put towards the climate emergency, right?
Thank you, Harry. Dick, if you want to mute again, I've got Terry Joyner next, followed, I hope, if you'll do it, by Morris, the point he's made. Terry, over to
Hi,
you.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to go back to normal. You know, I want it to be better. I always struggle when people say to me in conversation, "Oh, let's hope it goes back to normal soon," because I don't. I want it to be better. I've recently retired. I've got some money, and I want to retrofit my house. But it's when to do it, really. And if it's going to become more mainstream, I'm quite happy to wait. I don't live in Derbyshire. I think Derbyshire is amazing. I live in Staffordshire, which is less amazing. So I just wondered, probably, if the lady whose name I can't remember, I wrote it down. Denise, I didn't know if she'd got any advice, or if anyone else had, about how to go forward.
I don't have any advice about how to go forward. I wish I did. I think what you've said is absolutely crucial, that there are people out there who have the wherewithal to be able to retrofit their homes, but don't know what the process should be. What are the, you know, technically, practically, what do you do? Which builders would you go to that you could trust and have the expertise to do that? Would there be grants available? And we don't know. What I am really hoping is that over the next few months, this will become a priority, because so many emissions are pumped out of inefficient houses. And these houses are going to be here for 50, 100 years. So unfortunately, at the moment, I don't, but I do think that this is a priority. And I think national government is recognising that, and we are hoping for an announcement. Certainly Europe's about to make an announcement.
Okay, Denise,
what more can I say?
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Denise. Actually, a question from me before I ask Morris to make a comment, which is a question to Colin. Colin, I know there's the health campaigning movement of Health Campaigns Together and Keep Our NHS Public are developing a strategy, a way forward. Are you aware if that strategy includes an understanding of the climate emergency? Unlock, Colin.
That strategy in itself is not specific. I mean, there is an understanding that the way that healthcare is delivered at the moment is quite carbon intensive. Partly it's down to the buildings in which we're delivering healthcare from. Partly it's down to the amount of transport between of supplies, and the way in which laboratory services are now being outsourced to central laboratories. It means you need couriers to take samples to and from these centrally located laboratories, and people are being told that their local hospitals are either going to close or going to offer a much more limited range of services, and they have to travel to more centralized hospitals which can deliver the more specialized care that they might need. Whereas before, the way that we were trained, we were able to do that from district general hospitals. So there is an awareness of that dimension to it. But as I've said, the priorities at the moment are more aligned to the way in which the workforce has been run down, because you can have the best hospitals, you can have the best equipment, but if you haven't actually got the people to deliver the treatment and to interact with people, you can't do very much. There is an awareness that there is more scope for some remote consultations in certain circumstances, but we're being told that it will all be done online. There is a limited number of places you can stick an iPhone to tell you what's wrong with you. There is an organisation called MedAct, which is a medical campaigning organisation that do have a section that is involved in climate campaigning, because we are aware that it is one of the major public health issues facing us.
Thank you, Colin. Maurice, do you want to come in? Unlock.
On what, Keith?
I thought you want to make a comment about climate declaring an emergency.
I made that in the chat, but okay. So the fact is that despite the reduction in economic activity because of COVID, we are still experiencing, globally, a huge increase in carbon emissions. So when we have an agreement with the Derbyshire councils, including the county council, to act on climate change, that should be in the context of what's happening now, which is a steadily worsening carbon emission situation. Therefore, it should be, and it's vital that it's acknowledged as an emergency, and that the resources to do something about that emergency, like retrofitting, have to be made available in order to avert a catastrophe. Unless the county council, along with the other councils in Derbyshire, actually acknowledge that and use that argument with central government, where is the pressure to do something urgently rather than frittering away the last few years we've got before it's too late?
Okay. Thank you, Maurice. Kate, next. Unlock, Kate.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Maurice. I think that's fantastic. That's a councillor who's not specifically about the climate emergency, but with an awareness of that issue and the health issue. And I think what we need is for us all to get on top of each other's campaigns and to be able to show the relevance of all of them to each other. And I want to ask Harry if Build Back Better is actually going to do something about that, because I had high hopes, and I'm sorry, Dick, but I know you're big in this, but I had high hopes of the Derby People's Assembly, which is a national movement. But actually that became, during the referendum, that became a Leave platform, which is why I left it. So I'm worried about a movement of movements if we don't know each other's movements enough to represent them and show relevance. I think medics are talking about climate all the time. They're really big in the climate movement, saying very authoritatively, this is a bigger health risk, climate is a bigger health risk than COVID. So, you know, I think health are doing their bit. I just think we need some kind of coordination, because without that, Build Back Better could be a lot of time and energy without production.
Thanks, Kate. I just clearly it's now the time to start to broaden into discussion, and I'll pose a question in a moment. But following Kate's comment, Harry, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I building a movement is always difficult, and trying to sort of get this coalition together. We sort of build our organising a lot on the model of the Green New Deal hubs that we were in the process of setting up before COVID happened. And the idea there is that there's, you know, nationally we have ideas about, you know, if you're going to set up locally, what does that mean for your principles and your inclusivity? You know, you have a positive commitment in how you're going to organise and what you're going to do. And I think the big thing is making it outward facing. I think it's important that when we build these movements, we're always asking the question, who isn't in the room and who isn't talking about, when we're having a conversation about what our community looks like better, who isn't there, and being proactive in that sort of outreach and that engagement with communities who aren't traditionally engaged in health campaigning and environmental campaigning. And I think being engaged in that work has a huge impact on being able to effectively organise and be able to say, you know, we represent the community vision and we're doing it effectively, right? But yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult. There is the national team who sort of has oversight and can intervene in, you know, a situation where there is something like that, where it's almost like a de-escalation. Let's sit around the table and understand what's going on around here. But yeah, what we're trying to do is to just try and build this movement of movements that talks about, well, if we were given the money to change the economy to make it better, what would that look like for Derbyshire, for Scotland, for Wales, you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Harry. I'm going to begin to move towards asking you to make points, if you wish, about the common ground that the health campaigning and the environmental campaigning areas can find, and also to think a bit about the future. So rather than just making points, if we could focus those points a bit about common ground between the two major campaigns and other campaigns, as Harry's just been saying, other challenges and ways forward, but also towards the future. But I've got three people, Neil, Steph and Peter, in order. Neil first, unlock.
All right. Yeah, I sort of want to talk a bit about the future anyway, because I was just thinking that, you know, this talk that the government goes on with about wanting to get the economy back on track and that sort of stuff, even if we had a fairly quick uptick from this recession, that's going to flatten out. It might take 5 to 8 years to get back to where we were in March. We've only got 15 years until 2035, which is the closer, you know, tipping point that's been spoken about in terms of climate change, and it's only 30 years till 2050. Well, 8 years is a quarter of that. So we don't have the time to think about this in normal economic terms. We've got to use this as an opportunity to really push the argument for radical change in the economy, in society, in how we relate to the environment. And that, you know, it feeds into the Rolls-Royce issue in Derby as well. We can't expect Rolls-Royce to re-employ people, to keep building aero engines when that's going to be a reducing part of its business. We have to try and force the government and companies, as Harry was saying, to re-engineer or to redefine the skills that are necessary to push us forward into a new and better future. So that's it, really.
Thank you, Neil. Steph, unlock. Hi, Steph. That's it. Yeah.
Is this coming back to Colin and the NHS? I thought your wish list was really, really good because it's very focused. But one thing that worried me a bit that I wanted to ask you about was the decentralisation. because I think there's some parts of the NHS that need to stay national and central. One of them is NICE and one is the Care Quality Commission. I think without those two balancing the whole thing, there's fragmentation could be very destructive. What do you think?
Thank you, Steph. Colin, what do you think?
Well, certainly fragmentation into a host of financially autonomous organisations all working through commercial contracts has been one of the worst things that's happened to the NHS over the last 30 years. So no, that's not what I'm advocating. What I'm saying is that at the moment it's very much commanded from NHS England headquarters as to what is going to be done, and every single NHS organisation then has to jump to their tune rather than being given any degree of autonomy to make best use of the people that are working with them. And that policy focus tends to change. It's like the beam of a lighthouse going round and round, that something becomes the flavour of the day. Everyone has to focus on that, and then it moves on and people forget about it. Whereas building up good functioning departments of good people who can work together and get the resources they need is something that needs to be done at local level, and that's what really makes the difference. Sure, set the policy centrally, but have a regional structure, which we used to have, which worked extremely well, to actually make sure that those policies are translated on the ground by people who know the local structure. That's what I was, and the power of the lobbying organisations and the revolving doors between government, the civil service, and the big corporations, particularly the big four accountancy firms, has really poisoned the whole idea of public service within the NHS.
Thank you, Colin.
And the Care Quality Commission, there's a big division of opinion as to how beneficial the Care Quality Commission is. But NICE, I fully agree, that is one of the gems that we've got. That there is a methodical look at what is actually effective and what's the best way of carrying out treatment. But Care Quality Commission turns up after people have died, doesn't stop them from dying in the first place. Make the directors of NHS organisations personally accountable for the quality of care that takes place in their organisations. And I think you would see a much bigger change than continuing to pump huge amounts of money into the Care Quality Commission.
And we do need that change. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Colin. I know we're going to have to lose Denise quite soon to go to another meeting at work. So if any questions want to be directed towards Denise in the next 3 or 4 minutes, they're welcome. Peter and then Lynn.
Hiya. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hello, everybody. A couple of points. Firstly, the one about the climate emergency. Yes, it's much better if a council declares it, but actually there are councils that have declared a climate emergency who've got a worse track record than Derbyshire County Council, and it has made, compared to other councils, made quite a lot of progress. And so it's great to declare a climate emergency, but what really counts is the actions and the things that are happening. And I want to come back to the actions in a second. The second point I wanted to make is about movements of movements. And I've been involved in a number of attempts to help build movements of movements throughout my checkered career, or People's Assembly. I've helped build national alliances between climates and jobs and stuff like that. But I don't think these things can be built from above through formula. And we've got a brilliant example of how a movement of movements has just emerged with Black Lives Matter, and how that spread and cut across. And the thing about movements, it has all sorts of components, all sorts of parts and dynamisms, which are very, very hard to predict. Our real contribution is to do what we can, think outwards, of course, but do what we can locally. And that's where I want to come back to Harry's points, and anybody else really, but Harry's points about what are we doing now? Are we I believe that actually we really need to put pressure upon councillors now and MPs now, not wait for 3 weeks, but now, because now they're going through the decisions about rebuilding and coming out of the crisis. They're making the decision of whether are they going to forget the climate agenda or not. And we need to talk to them however we can, and MPs as well. And then Harry also mentioned some other dates. There's Harry, you'll remind us, there's the National Day organised by the National Climate Coalition, and then there's the NHS birthday as well. So we do those and build up our networks and build up the confidence. Then when the movement emerges, people know where we're coming from and we've got something to offer.
Thank you, Peter. I've got Lynn and Greg and Laura, and we're going to lose Denise in a few minutes' time.
Sorry?
Lynn, over to you. Unlock.
Hi, I'm just following on from Peter, really. I've got hope in Build Back Better, but it's how we actually join together and get ourselves seen, and it is by being not fragmented. I like the French model of actually getting out on the streets and creating a bit of a stir, but we have to really be joined together and have a national day, even a national day where we all get out. I mean, that might be sort of rose-coloured glasses and idealistic, but I think unless there's a national thing that will actually be reported on the news, because they just didn't report our NHS thing in London. But if it's national and harness the power of young people, like with the climate change, that's the only way it's really going to work. We can talk and talk, but I think we have to create a tsunami type wave first, and then talk will happen after that.
Thank you, Lynn, and we'll both of us buy a yellow jacket, shall we? Okay. Greg was next.
Hi, yeah, I just was wondering what their progress was on whether the county council was going to be doing anything around citizens' assemblies and trying to gain, just use citizens' assemblies or some kind of something like similar like that to try and gather views from what people want to build back better. Because we know that the public want a new normal. So I just wondered what the county council was going to do in terms of trying to engage the public, the Derbyshire public, on these issues of how we can try and build that better.
Thank you, Greg. Perhaps the last response from you, Denise, before.
I think it will. Yes. So I'll answer this and then I'll say goodbye. Yes, the council is putting together an engagement strategy, and we believe that it will take a large number of different approaches to engage our communities, and that will be things like conferences with businesses. It will be things like road shows where we actually are talking about climate change. It will include opportunities for people to contribute to what they think, a discussion, an educated discussion, similar to something like a citizens' assembly. I hesitate to use that term, but something like that, where people can learn about the issues and put forward their own suggestions, and we can come to some sort of consensus on that. Going into schools, it will be a huge engagement process, not just a citizens' assembly, because that won't be sufficient. I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody. And
I want to ask you, Denise, is there some way we can make sure we keep in touch?
Yes, do. I know, I think you've probably got my details, but Peter Robinson has got my details as well.
Lovely. Well, if I can just say on behalf of everybody, thank you for the points you've made and the information you've made available to us. Thank you, Denise. That's mine.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It's now Laura, and then we're going to start to wind up with some final comments from the two remaining speakers. Laura.
Just a comment really about contacting the MPs. We've tried so many times to contact our new MP. We've got, the time is now, so we know that that's...
Who's new MP? Who is it?
Sarah Dines.
Where?
Who, for Derbyshire Dales. She's replaced, what's his face? And I think there was supposed to be Zoom surgeries, and I've got emails between myself and her little helpers. There's a woman called Claire, and then there's someone else in London, and then it's been very, very difficult. I mean, some of us have had standard letters back from letters that campaigning letters we've written, but not that personal Derbyshire Dales thing that we need. And we are going to follow up the time is now and try and get her that way. But it's all very well. Who was it? It was Peter said, you know, we need to contact. Or maybe it wasn't. I can't remember. It's really not easy. But yes, we do need to. That's all I wanted to say about that. Sorry, thank you.
Oh, please, thank you. If I could just make a comment or two from myself. In the last month, the health campaigning movement has begun to try and get itself publicly noticed again. And so we agreed to go for a weekend, the 72nd anniversary of the NHS. And we're organising hopefully a big rally on the Sunday, a big Zoom rally. But actually, on Saturday in Derbyshire, we've agreed, the local campaigners, to do a kind of motorcade thing. And one reason why that interests me is because on a motorcade, it's possible to get our own videoing and get it on social media, which means that problems with mainstream media can be partly overcome, but also send it to mainstream media. We can choose where to stop. So I think we should be thinking about, on this motorcade around the NHS, think about places relevant to the issues of climate change. For example, things about the air quality, other issues as well. So we can actually indicate in the placards we take around us, and the motorcade you want, having the social distance problem, you're in a car with people you are already safe with. So you can be noticed and can be filmed. But I think we need to find common ground between ourselves, in my example, as a health campaigner, and with climate change and climate emergency issues. We need to find a way of doing that. And I'm quite keen to find very practical ways of doing that. I see that there aren't any more hats, are there? Lots of very interesting points are made, for example, about Robert Largan in High Peak, disgracefully won off Ruth George by about 100 votes, ridiculously. But he's an insecure Tory MP who we ought to be challenging very severely. I'm going to suggest that it's now time to move on to conclusion, because I don't see any hats in my chat box. So can I ask, first of all, Colin to make some concluding remarks, and then to ask Harry to do the same. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Keith. I think if the experiences of most people in the lockdown are anything to go by, it's really revealed how we are social animals, that we thrive on human contact, and we really do need, there's an appreciation that we are all very vulnerable to the changes that can come to us either through disease, but also through the much more massive challenge of climate change. Where we suffer is that there is a lack of belief within the governing bodies, the governing classes, that we can eliminate coronavirus rather than having to accept that we coexist with it. So they're not taking the bold steps that are needed to actually rid us of this virus and allow us to get back to enjoying live music, theatre, pubs, just hanging out with friends. There's the same lack of belief underlies the approach to climate change. There is not the belief that we can actually get on top of this, that we can use human ingenuity, and that by moving to a decarbonised world, we can all enjoy a better, healthier and more equitable life within that low carbon world, with better quality jobs. We need to make sure that the economy is our servant, not our master. And we've been convinced the other way for far too long. And it's time for people to actually see what are the most important things to their life. And I think And I think the last 3 months have given a lot of people a cause for reflection. Now is the time to make changes. Now is the time for all campaigning groups that share visions, even if not completely, at least in part, to come together and try and make our voice heard. All governments around the world are going to be pumping huge amounts of money into reflating their economies. How that money is used is crucial. Now is the time to make sure it's used in the right way. So I'm happy to work with whoever is willing to try and make sure that that happens.
Thank you very much, Colin. And there's some applause, I think is appropriate there. And Harry, over to you, Unlock.
Hi, yeah, firstly, thanks everyone for the amazing comments. It's been a really good discussion for 11 a.m. on a Friday. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to end on the fact that we should acknowledge that the past few months has been rather terrifying and rather worrying for a lot of people. I know I'm not the only person, obviously, who's been worried about family and people who've been shielded and the like. And I think that fear comes out a lot in sort of anger at the current situation, in particular about the chronic failures of everything, right? The austerity that's hit the NHS, the failure to deal with the climate crisis and the like, all seem to come back to the front right at this moment, and it comes through. And challenging that sort of situation, this chronic failure, and trying to shift the course of our society won't be easy. It's going to be really difficult. And so obviously, you know, emailing your MP and talking to them and sending a letter a lot of the time is traditional sort of organising, and you know, you get the default letter back, or you might get put through the ringer of their staff and all of this. But they need to know about the desires that communities have, that things be different, and that's the start, right? Along with that, we'll have the mass mobilisations around the NHS birthday, both with health campaigners and climate campaigners. We'll have local interventions when funding gets released to councils. And overall, what we're trying to do in the next few weeks and months is build this movement of movements that actually is able to say, no, let's change course. I'm quite emboldened at the moment, you know, despite being in lockdown and despite, you know, Zoom fatigue and the like, with just how much it seems like environmental movements, healthcare movements are shifting and are moving to new ways of organising that might just be what we need to intervene in this way. You know, we see events like this where we're seeing a whole new raft of healthcare campaigners talking to environmental campaigners and vice versa. I'm seeing people who've never been engaged in activism before come to meetings. I'm seeing new movements like Black Lives Matter emerge across the UK, across the US and worldwide. Overall, I think we'll really have to recognise that this moment is a key moment, and it's a key intervention that we can make. And to just, if we can build something that articulates locally and across the UK that we don't want to go back to normal, we can actually intervene and succeed in the coming months to shift our course, I think, on climate, on health and on the like. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening to me. And I'll send around an email with loads more stuff about Build Back Better and how to get involved. But yeah, just again, thanks for listening, and thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, Harry. That's excellent. I don't know whether people are also suffering from Zoom fatigue. I think it's been great to have people from different campaigning backgrounds together in the same Zoom. There might be an idea to do this again. Would people put up their hands if they think we should try and do this again, but actually being a little bit more focused towards the future? Yeah, so I think that's just about everybody. So that's great, thank you very much. I mean, I'm particularly pleased that we managed to get different speakers from different backgrounds to make presentations in this way. Tremendous. So I think if people involved in the climate emergency work and health campaigns can in the future get together and do some more planning on this kind, we'll see where that goes. I think it's also important to recognise, as Harry just said, that there are people across the country, and no doubt across the world, from different backgrounds emerging into activism and organising. My experience has been to see a lot more people of colour in most things I'm involved in these days, a lot more women, people much younger than most of us, much younger than me, not most of us. And I think there's actually a change in the movement, but actually quite fragmented. And today's been an opportunity and possibility of getting together a bit and doing some sharing. So that'll be the way forward. So particularly thank you to Denise, although she's gone, and to Colin and to Harry. So be careful out there. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay.
Hello, I'll